Hey, and welcome to Turo Fitness Podcast, a podcast for people who want to get no BS information about fitness and know that fitness is about so much more than losing scale weight. It's about feeling confident in your skin and empowered in your life. I'm your host, Turo Virta, personal trainer, strength and nutrition coach, and most of all, a husband of my beautiful wife, Miriam. Each week, my guests and me will give you some no BS fitness tips and motivate you to take action in your own personal fitness journey as we talk about nutrition, exercise, mindset, personal development, and executing in life with enjoyable but still effective strategies. If your goal is to look better, feel and be strong and experience transformation from inside out, you, my friend, are in the right place. Thank you for jumping in, and now let's jump into today's episode. So welcome to Turo Fitness Podcast. Today's episode, I have an amazing guest, Troy Taylor. Troy, first of all, welcome to my show. And before we jump into today's topics, would you mind a little bit introducing yourself, who you are, what you're doing, and a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, really appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to our conversation. Yeah, so background is mainly been for about 20 years was in Olympic sport. Was fortunate over about 20 years to work for 3 different Olympic teams across summer and winter sport for Team GB, Team Canada, and Team USA as a strength and conditioning coach, a physiologist, a sports scientist, later a director of sports science and medicine, and a high performance director. And so really just helping some of the best athletes in the world, hopefully adding 1 or 2% to their performance to hopefully get them on, onto the podium and ideally the top step of the podium. So really did that, enjoyed it, loved it, spent a long time doing it. And then around 2015, I was working as the high performance director at US Olympic ski and snowboarding team. And a lot of what my job was finding new innovations, finding what's coming next. Like, everyone's doing, I would say, quote unquote, at the elite sport, the basics. Everyone's got strength and conditioning coaches, everyone's got physiologists, everyone's got mental performance coaches or psychologists and dietitians and nutritionists. And, all the bases are generally quite well covered at this point. And so we were really thinking, and while we should focus on those 90% of the time, my job was a lot to think about what's coming next and where we might find competitive advantage. So I started working with a bunch of Silicon Valley companies. I'm based in the US, and Silicon Valley's down there. And so we started running projects in, transcranial direct current brain stimulation, a company called Halo back in the day. We ran projects in virtual reality and filming Olympic courses in 360 video. And as part of those explorations, I got aware of Tonal, essentially a home fitness company, but was doing something I thought was really innovative as it relates to resistance training. And fast forward a couple of years, I got one for some of my elite athletes, namely Michaela Schifrin, pretty decent skier, to say the least. Tried it. I loved it. And then, 2 years later, ended up working for the company. Essentially, they started a performance innovation team, really sort of working on the edge of product development. So how can we bring some of this elite level knowledge to a consumer fitness device? A little bit on our content, the programming that's on our programming, and also around thought leadership and research opportunities of how we can utilize this device to improve the lives of not just, elite athletes, but of hundreds of thousands and hopefully eventually millions of people. So I've been doing that for about nearly 3 years now, and it's pretty fun.
Oh yeah, I bet it sounds really, really fascinating. Would you mind sharing, what is that Tonal doing? What kind of fitness equipment? If so, nobody knows about that company, and what is it all about?
Yeah, absolutely. It's if you, depending on how we crop this video, but it's on the wall behind me. It's a strength training or resistance training device. It's essentially a functional trainer, like a dual table stack column, in that the arms come out and wide and there's cables that attach. But rather than providing resistance via a mass or, iron or steel, a dumbbell or a barbell or a weight stack going up and down, it generates the resistance via electromagnetic motors. And so that allows a couple of things. It allows us to be really small. It attaches to the wall. It's like 5 inches wide. And so you can make it much smaller, but you can also manipulate or change that resistance in ways that you couldn't do against gravity. And so something might be, let's say you've been in the gym and you've seen someone attach chains to a bar. They put chains on there. Yeah. When you're down deep in a squat or a bench press, the chain is low. So most of the chain is on the floor. So the bar is relatively light. As you ascend or you increase in your distance, more of those chain links come off the floor and the bar gets heavier. Well, we can just do that with the touch of a button. You can manipulate the resistance, and that's just one example, but in many, many different ways. And so home fitness equipment, resistance training, it's a functional trainer, but creates via electromagnetic resistance. And because we're connected to the internet, we can then do online coaching. We have a touchscreen TV, we have form feedback, we have computer vision, and all these technology pieces to essentially bring aspects of personal training to someone in their own home.
Mm-hmm. So do you mind, if somebody who is listening doesn't know what is you might have seen those chains, like you mentioned at the gym, but what is the purpose of using those? You have some studies or something why that is important, or what it helps?
So I think there's this. I take this in two ways. And we'll get to why I geek out and you probably geek out, but is the optimization, what extra gains can I get? And so we'll talk about that number one. We'll talk about that secondly. First off, what I actually find for general population is it's ways to provide variety to keep people engaged. I think that's actually the biggest benefit to something in a home fitness device. There are physiological outcomes that are beneficial, and we can talk about those, but it's ways to keep things engaging and training. You imagine, you're doing 4 sets of 10 of bench press for, twice a week or whatever it might be, or for 12 weeks. It gets a little boring after a while. The average person wants to stay cognitively engaged. Some of these ways that we can manipulate resistance, yes, they can be more effective in optimization, the outcome, but also they just keep people engaged and they add a little bit of variety, not too much, but a little bit of variety to keep people kind of interested in training. So I actually think they're more beneficial to general population, or as beneficial in that. On the optimization side of it, so we have multiple different modes, but I'll talk about the two that I think are most well known and common. So that chains mode that I talk about, the research evidence behind that really strongly suggests it's a great tool for developing power. If you imagine, power, being force times velocity, you've got speed in element and resistance. We are strongest or most powerful at the end range of motion, but normally we're slowing down, right, a little bit at that end range of motion because we don't want to kind of extend ourselves too far. By adding extra resistance at that, we can essentially increase power output and maximum power output. And power output you might think is for athletes only, and it's certainly an important piece for athletes, but actually power's probably got some of the strongest research evidence behind it for improving activities of daily life, for improving longevity, for movement quality. It's a really important skill. A lot of those sort of, as we get older, activities of daily living, like walking up the stairs, are power exercises, getting out of a chair. It's force over a short period of time. So that's chains. And we have another mode called eccentric, which essentially is where we overload the eccentric or the downward portion of the move. And there's a lot of research around accentuated eccentric loading, or eccentrics, in that we are about 25% stronger in that eccentric portion. So if I have to lift the weight and lower it, the maximum I can lift it is my kind of 1RM, right? Maybe that's 100 pounds or 100 kilos or whatever it might be. But I could lower it with an extra 25%, 125 pounds or 125 kilos. We can essentially manipulate that so it comes down heavier and goes up lighter. And so you can maximize strength adaptations that way. And there's a fair amount of research evidence suggesting that it's very good for maximal strength development, maybe for hypertrophy too. I would say that's a bit more questionable in the research, but there might be some evidence to say that it's quite good for muscle growth. So those are two of the modes. But then there's these whole other bunch of modes that we can do, or we do. We have things around spotter. Because we're monitoring velocity and movement all the time, we can detect when you're going to struggle. And so we can peel weight off. So you don't need a manual spotter or a human spotter. If you start struggling bench press, we can just reduce the weight. We have something similar to a drop set. It's called burnout mode, where we take the weight off a little bit until you start moving, and then we go again, and then we go again. And every time you get to that sticky point, we take a few pounds off, and so you can get this really good pump that might be very effective for hypertrophy. Which is the idea that we can monitor training in real time and adjust training in real time.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Like was how many people are really like if you are new or alone at the gym, you don't have a spotter or something like you mentioned, like that you can go easily, like when you are not quite sure if you can, are you able to hit that one more rep in, and with this new technology you can basically monitor all the time, if I understood correctly, like what is happening, how much you are able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like I train almost exclusively on tonal. I work for the company I'm wearing the logo. So yeah, take what I say with a grain of salt. But like I worked out in my home gym with a squat rack, and I still have one behind me before tonal. But I'm in my own home gym. My wife may or may not be upstairs. Do you think I'm squatting to failure? No, not likely, right? Or even bench pressing to failure. I'm probably 3, 4, 5 reps away from failure because I don't want to get stuck, because there's no one to shout, record a fail video of me in a gym. Like I'm going to be stuck there for a while. And so what I found is my training actually, I decreased the intensity a bit because I never got those close proximity to failure. And we don't need to train to failure all the time, but I think the research does suggest that going close to failure is probably a good thing for increasing in muscle mass. And so this really just gives me the confidence, and our members the confidence, to push closer to failure. Maybe it doesn't need to kick in, but I have the confidence that I can go to that 1 or 2 reps from failure, and I know I'm going to be safe. Even if I don't lift it, the weight will keep taking it off for me.
Yeah, this is something, especially working with a lot of women. This is something what most of the women are struggling with. Usually it's what I have seen, it's a kind of opposite. It's like the men, they are probably overestimating what they can actually do.
Too heavy.
Yeah, they are too heavy, and the women are like, I feel like that it's all the time when it starts to feel heavy, they're like that, no more. And the reality is that they could be easily, like you mentioned, do maybe 5, 6 more reps. Even they think that now I can't do it anymore. And this is just the kind of, I find it so fascinating as a secure way to go push yourself a bit harder and get closer to that failure. Like you mentioned, it's not necessary to go until failure, but pretty close to it. So what is your, in general, what is the research suggesting for how close to failure you should be going? Because you said that, like you mentioned, it's not the goal to go aim for failure every single time, but at least sometimes to try it. And what is the research for most optimal results?
Yeah, so I would say it's an evolving topic. Even like we've been researching strength training and hypertrophy for a long time, but I would say there's been 2 or 3 papers in the last year or 2 that have really, I think, kind of expanded our knowledge. So I'll try and condense it down. I think it's absolutely clear that you do not need to go to failure to get hypertrophy. Hypertrophy, a failure is not essential for hypertrophy. So you can train. But it seems fairly suggestive that whether you believe in a hard or a soft version of what we call effective reps, but the reps that are closer to failure. So it might be 5 reps, it might be 6, it might be 3, but relatively close to failure are more effective and stimulate more for hypertrophy. And then 2 papers that one's still a preprint, I think, and one that was released, one by a guy called Zach Robinson out of Florida Atlantic University, and one out of Martin Raffello, who I want to say is in New Zealand or Australia. And so the preprint were by Zach Robinson. Essentially, they took all the studies and they sort of try to estimate failure, because not every study measures failure or how many reps from failure you are, and they try to estimate. And so there's some challenges with doing that, but they tried to do a really comprehensive job. And they basically said it was a linear type of relationship between about 10 reps from failure. So 10 reps from failure, you start getting a little bit of hypertrophy, and 9 reps a little more, 8 reps a little more, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you got a little more hypertrophy in that research at failure than you did beforehand. The Martin Raffaello study that came out a couple of months ago, that was a one single training study, and they did essentially two groups, or I think it was within subject design. So one arm did, failure training, and one arm or one leg did 2 reps from failure training. And they saw no differences in hypertrophy between those. So my broad take on the research literature is that failure is not essential. It might be desirable on occasions for maximal hypertrophy, but if it is, it's probably a relatively small stimulus. It might be the last set of an exercise or of a day. It might be, not every training session, but some training sessions. I would, and the way that I plan and train most of Tonal's training, I'm looking for three reps, 2 to 3 reps from failure on the vast majority of sets, and then occasionally pushing myself. Mainly for what you said, so I know where failure is, so I know what that feels like, so I know I've got a reference point of knowing how close to proximity failure I am, and so I tend to program most of my stuff around that sort of 3 reps from failure as being the sweet spot. And I think the research generally suggests that between 1 and 4 reps you're probably in a pretty good spot.
No, well said. I totally agree, and I like to. If I think, like, obviously every coach have a different opinion. I like, my rule of thumb is like close, like 2 reps. That's pretty much like that. If you can imagine to do 2 more reps, that's enough. But if you can imagine to do more, then try to do 1 more. But it's not essential to go until failure, especially not in every set. But like you said, it's a good skill to learn.
Yeah, I think it's also your goal, right? If your goal is strength, actual maximal strength, failure, you probably want to stay a bit further away from failure. Yes, you want to lift with heavy loads, but you probably want to stay away from failure a little further. For hypertrophy, I think it is closer to that, but I think it's also related to the volume that you're doing. Like if I was only doing, let's say, I don't know, 4 sets per muscle group per week, which, there is research that says I could make decent gains at that. I'd probably be more likely to push most of them to failure or very close to failure than if I was doing 20 sets per muscle group per week. Just the volume, I think, piece comes into it. And I would say also, if I'm doing biceps, I'm pretty much going to failure every set. Like it's a small muscle group. It's not that fatiguing. I don't get systemic or central nervous system fatigue. You give me 3 to 5 minutes and I'm pretty good to go again. And so I'm going to take most of those, even if I'm doing 10, 15 sets a week, most of them are going to be maybe one rep from failure or to failure. Whereas squatting, I can't remember the last time I squatted to failure. And it will be a long time before I do it again. It's just, it's tiring, right? Even if I'm doing only a few sets, it's really systemically tiring. And so I think you have to think about, when you think about failure training, you think about, yes, how far from failure, but how much volume are you doing and what muscle groups are you working, and the interplay between those.
So let's talk about volume. Like, as you mentioned, what is the amount of sets per muscle group? Like, what do you think? What is the most optimal for, let's say, someone, for athlete or normal gym goer or beginner? Like,
Yeah. So I would say let's start with the hypertrophy research as I understand it right now. And I'd say there are 2 meta-analyses. One, they're both not that old, but there's been more research. And I think you'll see a new meta-analysis coming out. And a meta-analysis is just essentially a study of studies, all the studies in that area. And they pull the groups together to get bigger statistical power. And so the meta-analyses in that I would look towards would be Brad Schoenfeld's from 2016 or 2017, and Baz Vow's in 2020, I think 2022 maybe. And so essentially, we start to see hypertrophy growth, and actually the relatively biggest increase with about 4 sets a week per muscle group. I think the Brad research showed that about 67% of the muscle growth or something is achieved within by just doing 4 sets per muscle group per week. They saw slightly bigger increases if you did between 5 to 9. And in that research, they saw you got slightly bigger increases if you did 10 plus. But back in 2016 or 2017, whenever that came out, there really were not enough studies above 10 sets per muscle group per week to really give us a strong indication. The BASVAL research came back that they looked at it slightly differently, but they essentially found that between 12 and 20 sets is the sweet spot for maximal hypertrophy per muscle group per week. And so I would say those are the two sort of, I would say, meta-analyses in that subject. So generally, I would say between 10 and 20 sets per week is where most people are going to get most hypertrophy from. But you can still get a lot of hypertrophy or muscle growth well below 10 sets a week. If there's any Mike Mentzer fans in your audience, but there's very low volume. He was doing 1 or 2 sets per muscle group per week and claiming. Now, he was a Olympia bodybuilder and you don't know pharmacology and what's going on, but you can get good gains by doing that. I would also say there's a relationship between training frequency and volume that needs to be considered. So there's research that says generally approximately 6 to 10-ish sets per muscle group per training session is about the most you can get out of a stimulus of hypertrophy. So you might want to do 20 sets in the week, but you should only do, up to, I'd say, a maximum of 10, maybe 6, a minimum, or not minimum 6, but 6 to 10 sets in any given session. So that means you might need to train that muscle group 2 or 3 times a week to be able to get your weekly volume. And so that would be hypertrophy. There was a study came out ends last year that got a lot of social media. They started at 22 sets a week and then increased either 4 sets or 6 sets. And those guys ended up at the end of 12 weeks at 52 sets a week of legs, which is extremely high. And they saw greater hypertrophy. I would say that's a single study. It was really well done. In my opinion, it was in resistance trained people. They rested for long rest periods. They did a lot of stuff right. They showed increases, but that's a lot. I would say the vast majority of people can maximize their gains between 10 and 20 sets of volume per muscle group per week for hypertrophy. Strength is interesting because it's more of a skilled learned movement, right? So the more we do it, the better we get to some extent. So there is generally at least a frequency component, but we can get strong with relatively low volumes. We don't need to necessarily do crazy high volumes for strength in order to be able to do that, but we want to train those lifts fairly frequently, particularly if they're technically challenging. Something like a clean or a jerk or a snatch Olympic lifting, very technically difficult. Those people will train frequently, but won't train high volumes necessarily. So a little bit around what your goal is, but that would be my take.
No, very well said. And this is it comes to like an interesting point. Like because I don't know how many listeners are like in that level of who are actually even close to get like, let's say 10 to 20 sets per week, because that is a lot of exercising. Like that to be realistically in that range, you would need to strength train, like I would say 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week to get its or
if you were trying to do that for every muscle group, the way that I like to think about it is I generally have a muscle group or two that a specialization that I'm working on where I'm trying to get in that 10 to 20. And then I got maintenance volume for other things. And so I tend to I do train quite a lot. It's my job. It's also what I love to do, but I train relatively short periods of time. But what we also see with some of the members at Tonal is, I'll focus on a particular muscle group, maybe, okay, this time it's quads. And so I'm trying to get 10 to 20 sets of my quads. And but I might only be doing 4 to 6 sets of biceps and 4 to 6 sets of chest. And, so I've got these maintenance and the research on maintenance volume, as long as you're not in a big calorie deficit, actually says you can cut by 1/3, maybe 1/9 of your volume and maintain your gains, get very little decrease in muscle mass. And so I can kind of put these muscle groups on maintenance and then have a group that I'm specializing where I'm kind of focusing a little more of my volume. So it's a tactic you can use to maybe sort of, not have to spend 6 training sessions a week in the gym or 6 hours a week in the gym. You can kind of manipulate what you're focused on for periods of time.
And this is such an important point, like, because it's so little what you need for maintenance. It's if you get 1, 2 sets per week, it's you're pretty good. You're pretty good. And if you want to get,
you're not likely to lose much at all.
No.
If anything, for a long period of time.
Oh yeah, and it's the same thing. Same thing. Like if you like you mentioned earlier, even if you are getting even 4 sets per week per muscle group, you are likely to make relatively noticeable gains.
Totally. I would definitely take like something is always better than nothing. And the something, the nothing to something is the biggest change in dose response. That's where you get the biggest gains. I can't remember what this exact percentage is, but you know, it's logarithmic in its relationship in that you have to do a lot more to get a little more gains. And so yes, if you want to optimize, you want to be in 10 to 20 sets, but you hit 4 to 6 sets per muscle group per week and you're training relatively hard, you're going to make really, really nice gains for a really, really long period of time in the vast majority of situations. And so, yeah, you don't need to do that. I would also say, you know, I talked around strength and hypertrophy, but the health benefits, if you were trying to, you know, decrease all-cause mortality, death from cardiovascular disease, from cancer, from things like that, you can go 2 sessions a week, 30 minutes at a time, you're golden. You're literally, you've got the lion's share of your health benefits, cognitive, you know, your lower instances of Alzheimer's, associations with lower risk of cancer, of cardiovascular disease, of pretty much anything and everything. Yeah, a couple of sessions a week for 30 minutes a session, 60 minutes total, maybe a little bit more, but not a lot. And you're super in an awesome state.
Oh yeah, and this is just. I hope we get this message out for so many people that it's that consistency with the strength training. It don't need to be like, cause what I hear and see a lot from people, like when they are like that, if I can't work out 3 times a week, there's no point even starting.
Yeah, exactly. Why start? Yeah. We hear that too, and nothing could be further from the truth. That first session, even for 20 or 30 minutes, is the most valuable. The biggest gains come from that one. And yes, there are incremental gains from doing more, but just do something and you will be in a better place for sure. We actually have some data from Tonal. I was looking at it the other day. So we broke all of our members into like training frequency, like how often do they train? And the average member on Trainer is training closer to 3 times a week, where they invest in our device and they buy. But we looked at them, and the ones that train just like, I think it was twice a month, once every 2 weeks, still make something like 25% increases in strength over their first year. If you make that to once a week, it jumps up a little bit. You make it to twice a week and it jumps up again. So yes, there are incremental dose responses, but the minimum threshold for making changes, really pretty small. And so, don't worry about not having the, you know, I can't fit it in, I can't fit 4 sessions a week. Just start doing something is definitely a great piece of advice.
I love to hear that, because I'm all about telling that consistency. And now, especially I'm living here in Italy, and it's you know, especially in the summertime, like now, I hear from so many people that, you know, at the summertime, I leave my strength training, I focus on outside activities, and then I start in September again. And I try to somehow find a way to communicate it like that. You don't need to make gains in a summertime, but keep that habit up. Then do it, even it's a 1 session per week, or like you mentioned, even every other week. Even it's 2 sessions per month, you are maintaining everything. You are possibly even seeing some kind of progress. But the biggest value is that you are not going backwards, and you are able to even you have a muscle memory, even you, for some reason, you don't do anything for your muscles, and when you restart everything, you get relatively quickly back to the level where you used to be. So that's just that consistency is so much more important in strength training than kind of that perfection.
Yeah, 100%. I think, if I could preach one thing, would be to stick with it. And doesn't mean stick with it the same amount of times each week, but just have some stimulus in there, and you're going to continue to make great progress. One of the other metrics, I was looking at our database the other day, I think I made a post on this, was we were trying to find out, like, what associations with people early in their fitness journey hold true at, month 6 and month 12. So what do they do in their first week? And can we see associations? Now, this is correlation, not causation. So there's a difference between those two. So we can't infer causality. It doesn't mean that causality isn't there. It just means I can't confirm or deny whether it exists. And so we looked at the amount of training someone does in their first week of training and how that, how much training did they do in month 3, month 6, and month 12. And if you do more training in the first week, you do generally, on average, have a correlation or association with more training later, 3 or 6 months down the line. But what I found was actually almost more interesting was it's not what you do in the first week. You could start at 20 minutes. But if you did a little bit more in week 2 and a little more in week 3 and a little more in week 4, so you had this kind of upward trajectory in the amount of time you're training, and it needs to go on for the first month, that's way more predictive of being engaged in training in month 6 and month 12. So starting, doing something, and then adding a little more, an extra set or two, and doing that for a period of time, that was much more powerful as an association than starting with 4 hours a week and then you burn yourself out because you're sore and kind of things and you drop down. Yes, you want to do, more is better. I'm not necessarily saying it's not, but if you're worried about that, just an extra 5 or 10 minutes in weeks 2, week 3, week 4, and association wise, I can't say causation, but association wise, much better outcomes than starting high and decreasing because you got too tired, too sore, ran out of time. Small steps make big differences.
Yeah, no, and this is I love to hear it. This is exactly the same how I have throughout my coaching career. Like I remember back in the days, like I started coaching like it's now 8 years ago, I think. And I remember when people are contacting coach, they are highly motivated, and then the thinking process goes like that. Now, when I'm paying for a coach, I better take all advantage out of it. And then it was like that, starting from 0 and going for 4, 5, 6 sessions per week. And I was more than happy as a young coach to program somebody 5 times a week and thinking like that I'm going to get selfishly a huge transformation picture, like only 8 weeks and these amazing results. And the hard truth was when that first 2-3 weeks, I never heard those clients anymore, and they quit. They stopped. It was too hard. It was too much volume in the beginning, and now I changed my thinking process of this, and I often encourage them to start a bit less. What they realistically think, people, that what is possible. I said that if we start with let's say, you ideally want to go for 3 times a week, but what about we start with 2 times a week, even a bit shorter sessions, and the first goal is to become keeping promises what you make for yourself, getting that done, and then if it's week 2, week 3, and you feel good about it, it's actually fits into your schedule, you can do it, then it's time to add either a little bit longer sessions, 1 more session. And if not, if you're happy with results, then we are good. You don't need to why to do more if you are happy with the results and progress you are getting by doing less. So this is I love to hear that there is actually that you have a lot of data supporting this. What I have seen working with so many people.
Yeah. It was a data scientist. It wasn't me, but Christy, our data scientist, that did it, and it shocked me when I saw it. And it makes sense, right? I think it is James Clear in Atomic Habits talks about. He turned up to the gym and just went home. He just did the drive and then turned around and went back, and he was just getting used to that was his first step. He never even went in the gym. He went in the gym and he did 1 exercise on the left. It was just getting the muscle memory of going to doing that. But hundreds of thousands of people over, and these associations held true 12 months time from now. This wasn't, like if you do more in the first month, you also do more in the second. No, you make this increase 12 months down the line. We see these associations still. So that the minimum effective dose is real small. We don't have to do a lot of training. There are incremental benefits. I don't want to underplay them to doing a little more. But you can get a lot of the gains in doing that. And then, if you just slightly build on this habit, form the habit, and then build upon it, you're going to be in a really, really great spot. And our data suggests that.
Oh yeah, love to hear it. What about you mentioned about programming, like that it's not optimal, like what I see, like that those body parts, like you touch it a little bit of your own programming that you like to focus on one special muscle for certain period of time and putting kind of everything else on the backseat or maintenance. And what is your take on like kind of the optimal programming, like what type of like, 'cause I see in social media it's a lot like now in the fitness space it's kind of upper lower kind of splits, push pull legs, full body workouts. What is your recommendation? What do you think is the most optimal way to do
the
it?
op
It's a lot. It's a big question, I know, but
Yeah. I get in trouble with someone by answering it, but some influencer. I think the optimal split is the split that you stick to and you like doing. Other than that, I really don't think it makes any difference. You want to do full body, maybe I wouldn't do full body every single day, 5 days a week, but you want to do any combination, upper, lower, push, pull legs, a bro split body part, a specialization split that I personally kind of like to do. You like to do circuits, you like the research and a paper again came out on this shows that it doesn't really make a lot of difference. That like you need to be like, if you're worrying about that, you're in the 1%. I might as well go back to my Olympic athletes and trying to get the 1%. The split for the vast majority of times does not make any difference. And so it's, what do you enjoy? What do you like doing? And I think that's what you're going to like doing. You're going to be more consistent with over time, and then you're likely to get better outcomes from just being consistent. So I don't think there's an optimal split for pretty much any goal, and particularly in the real world, because I think people will, if they don't enjoy it, they're not going to do it. Saying that, I think there are some principles or heuristics. I don't like to train the same muscle group twice within a short period of time, maybe 48 hours ish. The research on that and fatigue and training under fatigue is much less strong than people make it out, that, you must wait 72 hours to hit a muscle group again. Well, I'm not actually sure we have strong evidence to say that, but I don't really like to work it when it's definitely very strongly fatigued. You're probably not going to get the same fiber recruitment. There's probably some mechanisms that are going on that are probably not optimal. So I don't like to kind of do back-to-back days of a ton of the same training session. But other than that, I don't think there's a lot of research evidence, and our data says people make gains all kinds of ways. And as long as they're consistent, that's the common thread. So I would say do what you like to do, as long as it's relatively sensible. Don't hit the same muscle group a ton. Don't start by doing tiny amounts of volume and then like exponentially increase 300% week to week. No, that will probably like to come to injury relatively quickly. But as long as you have some sensible parameters around that, I don't think it makes a ton of difference.
No, it's like you said, it's a large topic, and it's basically, it depends on personal preferences, also how your normal schedule is looking. I'm a big believer, like especially like, let's say you work 3 times a week, if it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for example, your workout days, and I'm a big believer of full body workouts. Like in this way, it's I have seen just that, because it's, if you like, what is often what I hear or see, especially younger generation who is taking workouts from Instagram or somewhere, it's their like a push pull legs split, and like you mentioned earlier, it's you get once in a week basically per muscle group, and if you get it, like even it's a bit less volume per workout, but you work out 3 times a week, I have found that people got more results, and especially for those, like if it happens, life happens, and you miss one workout, you still get at least some sets, some reps in for each muscle group, because if you miss, it's always the leg day, it's a Friday, and there's something happening, and you never get your legs in. So
I think that's a really sensible recommendation. I would generally gravitate, if I'm doing 3 or less times a week, if I'm programming that, it would probably be full body. But I really like your point there around, like, if you do miss, if life comes in the way and you do miss a session, you're still getting enough stimulus to at least maintain and probably still grow from the other 2 sessions. So you have your bases covered, which is sensible real world programming for sure.
What about then for athletes? Like, because you have a very big background working with athletes. Like, if somebody's, let's say, somebody's trying to get faster, if it's a whatever sport, if it's running. Like, I'm a ice hockey coach, and most of the players, they want to become faster. So, what is your take on this? Like, what is the training philosophy for someone who want to become faster?
Yeah. Well, the said principle, specific adaptations to impose demands. So like this, basically the rule of specificity is king of all. And so if you want to get faster at an exercise, you need to train fast at that exercise. And I think that is the most powerful that you can do, whether that's sprinting, hockey, skiing, doesn't really matter. Like, you think about the neurological patterning and mechanisms and firing rates and getting specific motor neurons. You need to do that a lot. And so I think that is undeniable. From a strength training basis, I would say we're working more on the fundamentals of like the underpinnings of, okay, do we have enough muscle mass? Like, there is a relationship between the size of my muscles and the amount of strength or force that they can produce. It's not 1-to-1. It's not perfect. And just because you have large muscle mass doesn't mean that you are automatically strong, but it does give you a bigger ceiling for strength. And when we're talking about power, or a lot of what we have to do for speed is on the power side of it. We have to have large points of strength with large pieces of velocity. And so I would think about, okay, where is their weaknesses in their physiological profile? And so, if someone is super fast and really, really bouncy pops, can do plyos for fun, but can only squat body weight, maybe, or something like that, then I'd be more thinking about in the off season, further away from training, hey, let's put on some strength to raise that ceiling, or let's put on some muscle mass if they're really skinny, do some more hypertrophy early in the season, convert that hopefully into strength maybe in the sort of the mid of the off season, and then realize that potential in more of a sort of linear periodization kind of fashion. If that person is, they're relatively fast, but they're more like a running back in football, which they're some speedy players, but they do not need to put on muscle mass or stride. They're massive. They got 30-inch quads, and can squat 6 times body weight or whatever it might be. Like, then I'm going to be focused a lot more on very specific movement patterns for them and understanding. Okay, well, where's the kinetic breakdown in their speed? Is it ankle flexion? Do they have the sort of the knee mobility to get into the positions that we need them to? And so I think you have to think around that. So the exercise should always be the number one priority. And I'm a big fan of never getting too far away from something like speed, even in the off season. Like, don't go out and do max sprint efforts on the ice or on the track all the time, but you should have elements of speed in there at all points. Like, they don't have to be 100%, but 90+% kind of efforts just to keep you tapping it into there, and then identify where does that individual athlete, where is their weakness. We'd work on something that we call like a gold medal profile, or in Britain they call it what it takes to win. And you can kind of create this parameters for the athlete around, well, what do they need to be able to do technically, tactically, physiologically, and psychologically, emotionally? And you can break down the components. And hey, they're not robots. You can't get everyone to perfect, but you can identify, hey, there's a deficit here. We maybe let's fill that in a little bit, give them a little more size, a little more strength, convert that, whatever it might be. Or the opposite, they're really strong at this, and let's turn that strength actually into like a sustainable competitive advantage. Let's lean into that really, really well. And that's something that we also do. It's not always about working on weaknesses, although there is value in bringing them up to a level. But if you have most of the athletes that reach the top level, they have something special about them, right? They have something they're really good. let's amplify that. You don't make Messi a better soccer player by making him a better defender. You make Messi a better soccer player. I don't know how, but it would certainly be in attacking and dribbling and making his strengths even better. So there's a minimum amount. The way that I think about it is like fill the deficit to the minimum amount and then maximize what they're really good at and try and think about it that way.
Yeah, no, I love it. This was actually exactly the same thing. Like, was I asked from Italian national players, like I asked them like what 3 goals, what they want to work on this and this summer. Because often athletes, if you tell that the 3 objectives, they tell right away their weaknesses. But I address it that don't tell only your weaknesses. What is your strength to make you even more outstanding with the strength you have? Because that is as you mentioned, that is so important to be someone like you don't need to do as an athlete everything and be not the weakest in any part, but if you are really outstanding in some part, why not to make it even better?
Yeah, and it really does depend on the sport and it depends on the weakness. There is actually a research study by Mark Williams that does say that elite athletes, I think it was soccer players, and they looked at like truly elites, people that are like greats versus and they did spend more time on individual practice working on their weaknesses. But it was relatively so. Like it wasn't that Messi spent hours on defending, and I don't know if Messi was in this research, but like it wasn't that he spent more hours on defending, but he wasn't quote unquote the best at, I don't know, corner kicks or something. And so he spent more time on that weakness. So there is that, but it's like, is that weakness, like, is it a competitive disadvantage or is it just something you're not that great, but it doesn't really matter. And it's identifying those. Michaela Schiffer and Lindsey Vonn are athletes that I've worked with in the past. They work on their weaknesses because it was things that were costing them race times. And so when it costs your race time, you have to work on your weakness. But if it's just a skill that you're not that great at, but it doesn't necessarily matter to your game or your particular kind of piece, then maybe it doesn't matter so much. And I think you have to sort of work on that. But elite athletes should never not maximize their strengths. I think that should be a component of their practice at all times, is to maximize their strengths.
No, absolutely. It makes totally sense. Like, obviously, it depends so much on sport. Like, if you are like a ski racer, obviously, if something is causing
if you can't finish the last 25% of the race because you don't have aerobic capacity, that's not particularly great for you.
It's better to work on that and not focus on that first 25, like what is giving that kind of the importance of that understanding that whole event, whole goal, what is giving more like kind of return for what you are actually doing. So it makes totally sense. Thank you so much, Troy. I think we could keep talking for hours, as this is we are both very, very passionate about it. Would you mind telling a little bit to my audience about you, where to reach out, where to get Tonal, and what is it all about?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're interested in finding out more about Tonal, our website, www.tonal.com, is probably the best place. You'll be most likely greeted with LeBron James, who's an athlete that we work with, on the front page. But you can get technical specs about the device. We are only available in the USA right now. We hope to get to Europe at some point soon, but it's a little more challenging. Not in my wheelhouse, but other people are working hard on that. If you want to learn more about just how people use it and the members and that, we have a Facebook community, the official Facebook Tonal community on Facebook. You can join just as prospects, and you see real members talking about their journeys. And honestly, I find that the most heartwarming. I spend probably too long in there. I was pre-diabetic. I had type 2 diabetes. I had cardiovascular disease, and strength training has really helped me, mitigate some of those things or overcome some of those as part of a long holistic health problem. So that's really cool for some stories. And then, I'm on LinkedIn under Troy Taylor, and at Strength Science Troy is my Instagram handle, where I post a little evidence-based fitness, a little tonal data, some training ideas, stuff like that. So I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Troy, and definitely go check out Tonal, Troy's LinkedIn, Instagram page, and I will put those all to show notes, so you will find links from there. So thank you for listening, and talk to you soon.
Hold up, friend. Do you love Fit Me Turo Fitness podcast? If so, the best way to say thank you is to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review on iTunes. I know every podcaster wants you to leave a review, but it's because those reviews help the podcast to reach more people. I truly want to know what you think, and if this particular episode resonated with you, would you also please share it? Either send a link to someone who you think will find it valuable, or take a screenshot and post it into your social media and tell your friends and family why they should listen it. Make sure you tag me so I can hear your feedback and give you a little love. And if you aren't already following me on Instagram or TikTok, that's the perfect time to hit that follow button. Thank you for being here and listening to Fit Me Turo Fitness podcast.